Well, I'm recording this on New Year's Day 2021, and in Iowa here it's right in the smack dab of winter. Well, if you think it's cold here, if you lived further up north, much further, it would be a lot colder. And not only that, it would be dark because the sun would only peek out a few minutes at a time at this time of year, which is one of the funny things about this story because the little girl lives in an igloo, which might be fine in the winter, but then she goes out under the midnight sun. The midnight sun, when it shines almost all day and night too, well, that's in the summer, when the Inuit people from whom this story comes would have lived in tents. Now, of course, most of you know what an igloo is. It's a round house made out of snow and ice, and if you want any outside light coming in, you gotta leave an opening. And also, to get in and out, there wouldn't be a storm door like we have down here. No, you'd have a tunnel you had to crawl through. That would keep the wind out, but you'd have to get down on your hands and knees to get out. And of course, at night, if you wanted some light, you couldn't have electricity. There would be no way to wire it. You'd have to have a stone lamp and burn some seal oil. You get light all right, but it'd be a flame and you'd have to be careful of it. And you wouldn't cook food on an oven either. You'd have to have a fire with wood. And of course, there has to be some place for the smoke to go. So you'd have to have a hole in the ceiling, a smoke hole. And might not have a lot of our modern conveniences too back in those days. Well, if you wanted to sew something, you'd have to make a needle out of bone. And all of those things are part of this story. Once upon a time, in the far north, there was a little girl who lived with her grandmother. Now, that little girl loved to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. One time she ate so much that her grandmother looked all over the igloo and she couldn't find any whale blubber anywhere, nothing to eat at all. So she said to her granddaughter, "Granddaughter, if you want something more to eat, you're going to have to go out and find it for yourself." So the little girl crawled out of the igloo door, and out under the midnight sun, she walked along the shore. And there, on the ice, she saw a tom codfish. When she saw that tom codfish, she ran up to it, she grabbed it by the tail with one hand and popped off its head with the other, and she ate that tom codfish all up. "Boy, that was sure good," she said. "But you know what? I'm still hungry." So she walked along the shore, and there on the ice she spied a seal. When she saw that seal, she ran up to it, she grabbed it by the tail with one hand, popped off its head with the other, and she ate that seal all up. "Boy, that was sure good," she said. "But you know what? I'm still hungry." So she walked along the shore, and there on the ice she saw an ooglook. "What's an ooglook?" you may well ask. Well, it's just a big kind of a seal. When she saw that ooglook, she ran up to it, she grabbed it by the tail with one hand, and popped off its head with the other, and she ate that ooglook all up. "Boy, that was sure good," she said. "But you know what? I'm still hungry." So she walked along the shore, and there on the ice she saw a walrus. When she saw that walrus, she ran up to it, she grabbed it by the tail with one hand, and popped off its head with the other, and she ate that walrus all up. "Boy, that was sure Good, she said. But you know what? I'm still hungry. So she walked along the shore, and there on the ice she saw a great big white whale. When she saw that great big white whale, she ran up to it. Don't ask me how she did that. She held it by the tail with one hand and she popped off its head with the other and she ate that great big white whale all up. Boy, that was sure good, she said. You know what? I'm not hungry anymore, but I'm sure thirsty. So she waddled along and waddled along until she found a great big pond. Then she bent down and drank and drank and drank. And when she got done drinking, that pond was completely dry. Then she waddled and sloshed all the way back home, singing a happy, wet song to the whole wide world. I'm happy now. I'm happy. I'm happy now. I'm happy. But when she got back to the igloo and tried to crawl in through the door, her head got stuck. She had eaten and drunk way too much. So she called out, "Grandma, I can't fit in through the door." Now Grandma was sewing together 2 sealskins to make a coat with a bone needle. She stopped her sewing and said, "Well then, granddaughter, you'll just have to try to fit in through the window." The window, thought the little girl. That's even smaller than the door. But if Grandma says, I must at least try. So she walked along to the side of the igloo, and when she got to the window, as if by magic, her head popped right through. But not the rest of her. She was still way too full. So once again she called out, "Grandma, I still can't fit in through the window." Once again Grandma stopped her sewing and said, "Well then, granddaughter, you'll just have to try to squeeze in through the smoke hole." The smoke hole, thought the little girl. That's even smaller than the window. But if Grandma says, I must at least try. So she crawled up to the top of the igloo, and when she got to the smoke hole, as if by magic, her head and shoulders popped straight through, but not her tummy. It was way too full. And now she was hanging upside down when she called out, "Grandma, I still can't fit in through the smoke hole." Once again, Grandma stopped her sewing and held up her bone needle and said, "Well, then you're just going to have to try to squeak in through the eye of this needle." No sooner had Grandma said those words when, as if by magic, the little girl slipped in through the eye of the needle right into the igloo and started to slide across the slippery floor. Look out for that seal oil lamp," said Grandma. Too late. And when Grandma woke up, the igloo was gone, the little girl was gone, the seal oil lamp was gone. But there was a great big puddle, and swimming in that puddle was a tom codfish, a seal, an oogluk, a walrus, and a great big white whale. And that's why you call this story A Whale of a Tale.